This Russian family had cut itself off from civilization for almost 40 years. Four geologists were searching for prospective iron ore in 1978 while flying a helicopter above the southern Siberian taiga forest, which was rich in minerals but ultimately uninhabitable. Suddenly, the pilot observed something unusual, a garden that was definitely man-made. It was situated tens of thousands of feet above sea level, 150 miles from the nearest sign of civilization, and perched on a mountaintop where the likelihood of survival was not just remote but virtually non-existent. However, since the garden was present, it was obvious that humans were also present. The geologists made the choice to fly close by and walk there. They set themselves up with food offerings for what they hoped would be a calm gathering. In the event of the worst-case scenario, at least one person packed a handgun. The team arrived in the area and found a little house. Geologist Galina Pizmenskaya later said, "The cabin was stacked up on all sides with taiga rubbish, bark, poles, planks, blackened by time and rain. It would have been difficult to believe there were people living there if it weren't for a window the size of my rucksack pocket." Then a figure appeared, a man with a wild beard and shabby clothes. "Greetings, grandfather," said Pizmenskaya. "We've come to pay you a visit." "Well, since you've come this far, you might as well come in," he said after an uncomfortable silence. Karp Lykov was the man's name, and he had a story to tell. He and his family had been living in full isolation from the rest of the world on a lonely Siberian mountaintop for more than 40 years. The Russian Orthodox Church changed its liturgical traditions in the middle of the 17th century to more closely resemble Greek customs. The majority of the members embraced the reforms, but a faction known as the Old Believers refused to blend in. The Old Believers believed the modifications implemented by a centralized church they did not support were blasphemous. Despite the fact that it may seem insignificant to split from a church over disagreements like the number of fingers used when making the sign of the cross. They were so committed to maintaining their old practices that many would have taken their own lives rather than adopt the new practices. The Russian Orthodox Church persecuted and exiled Old Believers for years as a result of this schism, imprisoning, torturing, and even taking their lives. With the advent of an atheist communist dictatorship in the 20th century, many people departed the country, and those who remained faced an increased threat. When Karp's brother was assassinated by a Bolshevik patrol in 1936, the situation for the Lykovs reached a breaking point. Karp relocated his wife, Akulina, and their two children, 9-year-old son Savin and 2-year-old daughter Natalia, into isolation in the solitary wilderness of Siberia since their Old Believer status was now more endangered than ever. The family established a home in the Arctic wilderness there. With what they could find, they constructed a one-room cabin. They lived off of potatoes, almonds, rye, berries, and anything else the land gave because they had neither plumbing or electricity. When their worn-out clothing could no longer be repaired or patched, they produced new garments from hemp. Their shoes were made of bark. Despite the dire circumstances, the family managed to expand as daughter Agafia was born in 1943, and son Dmitry was born in 1940. Even though the children had limited knowledge of the outside world, Karp did teach them stories about Russian cities and life beyond the hut, but it was through the eyes of an Old Believer. The kids also learned to speak Russian, although with a lot of archaic phrases interspersed, and Old Slavonic. Those were tales of a godless, wicked, and contemporary society full of individuals that should be feared and avoided. The Lykov family struggled greatly with aspects of life that are taken for granted in modern society. And the harsh Siberian climate severely damaged their improvised food source. Akulina frequently sacrificed her own meals during one particularly famine-stricken period to make sure that her children's bellies were a little more filled. In 1961, she perished from malnutrition. The Lykovs had been isolated from the outside world for some 40 years by the time the geologists got in touch with them. They were unaware that World War II had ended, and according to reports, Karp didn't think we had set foot on the moon. though he had a sneaking suspicion we had at least reached space based on the satellites he had seen shooting across the sky. He explained that people were sending out files that looked a lot like stars because they had thought of something. The family was unaware of much of the 20th century's advancements, and they were enthralled by the new technology they were shown. Dmitri, in particular, was astounded by a circular saw that could do tasks that would normally take him hours or days. Karp, on the other hand, appeared most ecstatic with the geologist's gift of salt, which he described as true torture to live without. Agafia has been the last of the Lykovs since Karp's passing in 1988. She remains isolated, though she is significantly more accepting of outside assistance than her family had been for decades. People have responded to her tale by bringing her food, Old Believer newspapers, and other things to assure her health and safety. In recent years, she has made a few visits into civilization for medical attention and to visit relatives.